ever dream of just effortlessly floating on water? Well, that's the Dead Sea for you, the lowest point on Earth, and our deep dive topic today. We've got articles, research, even some historical accounts, all about it.
A place where you get science, history, and even some mystery all rolled into one.
Exactly. So the Dead Sea, for anyone who hasn't been lucky enough to visit yet, it's this hypersaline lake, right? It's nestled between Jordan, Israel, and the West Bank.
Right.
And hypersaline is putting it mildly. We're talking almost 10 times saltier than the ocean.
Yeah.
Which I guess is why they call it dead. Not much can survive in that, or so you'd think. But turns out there are some pretty tough organisms that actually call it home.
It's a fascinating example of how life, adapts, even in the most extreme conditions.
For sure. But before we get to those little survivors, I've always wondered, why is the Dead Sea so much saltier than regular oceans? What's the deal there?
Well, it's all about location and evaporation. The Dead Sea, it's landlocked, so water can only escape by evaporating into the air. But the salt and minerals dissolved in that water, they're left behind. Over thousands of years, that process has basically concentrated the salt. That's what creates this unique environment that we see today.
So it's like this giant natural evaporation pool constantly getting saltier. And that's what explains the whole floating thing, right? It's not a camera trick. People actually bob around on the surface.
Yeah, it's one of those things you got to see, or rather feel, to believe. The high salt content makes the water so dense, much denser than us. So basic physics takes over, you just can't sink.
Okay, that is officially on my bucket list now. Floating in the Dead Sea. Got to do it. But how did this wonder of nature even form in the first place? It wasn't always this isolated salt-filled basin, was it?
No, not at all. Millions of years ago, the Dead Sea was actually part of a much larger body of water called the Sedum Lagoon. And get this, it was connected to the Mediterranean Sea.
So there was a time when it wasn't landlocked. That's wild.
Exactly. But then things got, dramatic. Remember those tectonic plates, the ones that are constantly reshaping the Earth? Well, the African and Arabian plates started pulling apart millions of years ago, and this created what we now call the Jordan Rift Valley. Picture a giant crack forming in the Earth's crust.
Whoa, okay, I'm picturing it. And that rift, that's what separated the Dead Sea from the Mediterranean.
Exactly. The valley just kept sinking lower and lower, and eventually it isolated the Sedum Lagoon from its source of water. And that's when the Dead Sea, as we know it, started to take shape.
So like a giant natural bathtub, but someone turned off the faucet, and then that desert sun did the rest.
It wasn't quite that simple, though. Picture this. Alternating periods of flooding and drying over thousands of years, each one leaving behind layers of sediment and salt. That's what gives the Dead Sea its unique structure and makes its geology so fascinating.
So every layer is like a page in the Dead Sea's history book.
Yeah.
And to add to that salty history, the surrounding landscape, that plays a role too, right?
Oh, absolutely. The whole region is naturally rich in salt and mineral deposits. Over time, rain and erosion, they've carried those deposits into the Dead Sea and just boosting its saltiness even more. So it's really a combo of factors working together over millions of years to create this, phenomenon.
Okay, so we've got the salty water, the epic geological backstory. But what about life? Is anything actually living in this so-called Dead Sea?
You'd think not, right, with all that salt. But that's the amazing thing about nature, Life, it finds a way. You won't see schools of fish or coral reefs down there, but there are microorganisms that not only tolerate, but thrive in those conditions.
Hold up, so it's not actually dead. Okay, tell me more about these little survivors. What makes them so special?
They're what we call extremophiles, basically organisms that love extreme environments. We're talking certain bacteria, some algae that have evolved to thrive in these hypersaline conditions.
They're like the ultimate salt lovers. How do they even survive in that? What kind of adaptations are we talking about?
Well, first off, they've got to prevent themselves from shriveling up. Salt draws water out of cells, right? So these organisms, they've got special mechanisms to keep their water balance in check.
It's like they have their own built-in desalination plant. What else makes them different?
Think about it all. Their cellular machinery, their enzymes, their proteins, everything has to function differently to cope with the extreme salinity. It's just incredible, the adaptability of life.
Mind blown. We should rename it the surprisingly lively sea. But speaking of names, the Dead Sea, it's got a long history, right? I mean, it pops up in ancient texts, all sorts of stories.
Oh, absolutely. It's been a significant location for centuries. Historically, spiritually, you name it. In the Bible, for example, it's called the Salt Sea. It's even a key part of the story of Sodom and Gomorrah.
Right. The cities that, according to the Bible, were destroyed by fire and brimstone.
Hmm.
Is there any truth to that whole myth that they're now under the Dead Sea?
That's a question that has fascinated people for ages. While there's no solid scientific proof, that they're literally underwater, that story definitely adds to the mystique of the region.
Makes you wonder. And speaking of ancient history, got to mention the Dead Sea Scrolls. That's a pretty major discovery.
For sure. Imagine ancient manuscripts hidden away in caves near the Dead Sea for centuries, then bam, rediscovered in the 1940s. It's like a time capsule,
Yeah.
a glimpse into the past.
And they contain some pretty important stuff, right? Like biblical texts, writings that shed light on early Judaism and Christianity.
Exactly. Incredible insights into the development of those religions and the history of the whole region. The Dead Sea Scrolls, they're considered one of the most significant archaeological finds, ever.
It's mind-boggling to think about them being hidden away for so long, just waiting to be found. Okay,
Yeah.
so ancient cities, biblical tales, hidden scrolls. What else? It feels like this place is just steeped in history and legend.
It's where history, geology, and spirituality all kind of converge, And there's still so much to uncover to understand about this extraordinary body of water.
I bet. And can't forget the whole health and wellness thing. The Dead Sea, it's a hotspot for, therapeutic benefits, right?
Yeah.
What's the deal with that?
Yes. Remember all those minerals we talked about? Well, it turns out they're not just good for floating. The Dead Sea's water and mud, they're packed with beneficial minerals like magnesium, potassium, bromine, all known for their healing properties.
So like a giant natural spa? Where do I sign up? What are these minerals supposed to be good for? Exactly.
Well, first off, the high salt concentration acts as a natural detoxifier, helps dry out impurities from the skin, leaves you feeling refreshed.
Interesting. Any specific skin conditions that really benefit?
Definitely. People with things like psoriasis, eczema often find relief in the Dead Sea. The minerals plus the unique composition of the water, it can soothe inflammation and reduce irritation.
And the mud. I've seen those pics of people covered in that thick black mud. It looks messy, but kind of fun. What's so special about it for skincare?
Dead Sea mud. It's like a treasure trove of minerals. Helps promote circulation, gently exfoliates, even improves skin elasticity, a natural facial and body mask all in one.
No wonder his Dead Sea mud masks and creams are so popular. It's like you can bottle up the therapeutic powers.
It's definitely a sought-after ingredient, but it's important to remember even natural remedies can have risks, right? The high salinity, it can irritate sensitive skin, especially if you have any cuts or open wounds.
Good point. Better safe than, even with natural stuff. Anything else to keep in mind?
Oh, and this probably goes without saying, but don't drink the water. That high mineral content, it can make you sick, seriously.
Duly noted. Okay, adding the Dead Sea to my travel list, officially. What are some must-see spots around there?
If you're into history, you gotta see Masada. It's this ancient fortress perched on a plateau with the most incredible views of the Dead Sea, a place full of history and, drama.
Ancient fortress with a view. I'm sold. What else is there?
If you're more into nature, the Ain Nature Reserve is amazing. It's like an oasis with waterfalls and hiking trails. A nice contrast to the starkness of the Dead Sea itself.
Wait, waterfalls in the desert. Didn't see that coming.
And then, of course, you can visit Qumran. That's where they discovered those Dead Sea Scrolls we were talking about. It's an active archaeological site with ruins of an ancient settlement. It gives you a glimpse into the lives of the people who created those scrolls.
Wow, so much to see and do. Sounds like tourism must be a big part of the Dead Sea region's economy, right?
Absolutely. Huge economic driver, attracts people from all over the world. But there's a flip side, right? Tourism often comes with environmental challenges.
True. What kind of impact is it having on the Dead Sea and the surrounding area?
It's all about balance. That influx of tourists, it puts a strain on resources, especially water. We're in a desert, so water is precious.
So increased water demand is a major concern.
Definitely. And then along with that comes the challenge of managing waste, pollution, finding ways to reap the economic benefits while minimizing the impact. That's the key.
Sounds like sustainable tourism practices are crucial.
100%. There are lots of efforts to educate tourists, about being responsible, to implement eco-friendly infrastructure, to lessen the strain on the environment. It's about finding ways for tourism and conservation to coexist.
Fingers crossed those efforts work. But speaking of threats, isn't the Dead Sea shrinking?
Yeah, unfortunately, that's one of the most serious issues facing the Dead Sea right now. Those water levels are dropping, and it's happening fast.
That's scary. What's causing it?
There are a few factors, but a major one is water diversion from the Jordan River. That's the Dead Sea's main water source. Over the years, more and more water's been diverted from the Jordan for agriculture, other uses, so less and less is flowing into the Dead Sea.
It's like the Dead Sea is slowly being cut off from its lifeline.
And it's not just the reduced inflow either. You've also got mineral extraction. Companies have been taking minerals from the Dead Sea for decades, which also contributes to the drop in water levels.
Double whammy. Less water coming in, more being taken out. What happens if it keeps shrinking?
One of the most obvious consequences is sinkholes. Imagine giant craters just opening up in the ground.
Sinkholes? That's terrifying. Why are those forming?
As the water levels go down, the ground underneath becomes unstable, and that leads to these collapses, which are dangerous for people and buildings, you name it.
A stark reminder of how delicate that whole environment is. Are there any efforts to address this, like to stop the shrinking? Any solutions?
There are a few, but one of the most ambitious ones is called the Red Sea Dead Seawater Conveyance Project.
Okay, tell me more. What's the plan?
It's a massive project. The idea is to pump water from the Red Sea, desalinate it, and then send it through a pipeline to replenish the Dead Sea. A complex engineering feat, for sure, but it could potentially solve both the water shortage in the region and the shrinking of the Dead Sea.
Sounds promising. But I'm guessing a project that big comes with its own challenges, right?
We're talking big technical hurdles, environmental concerns, and it requires cooperation between different countries. It's a huge undertaking, needs careful planning and execution.
I'm guessing it's not a quick fix. Like, this will take years, probably decades.
Yeah, you're right. Progress has been slow, and there's still a long way to go.
Well, let's hope that this project, and others like it, can help save the Dead Sea. It would be a real tragedy to lose it.
I agree. The Dead Sea, it reminds us how interconnected everything is on our planet. It shows us how our actions, they have consequences, and it highlights just how urgent it is that we find solutions that benefit both people and the environment.
Well said. And on that note, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back to explore more about the Dead Sea, including its unique air quality, its role in modern culture, and what's being done to protect its future. Don't go anywhere. We're back and still diving deep into the fascinating world of the Dead Sea. Before the break, we were talking about how it's shrinking. It's pretty clear that this unique environment is facing some real challenges.
It definitely shows just how vulnerable even the most, incredible natural wonders can be to human activities and environmental changes, too.
So true. But it's not all bad news, is it? There have to be some glimmers of hope, some efforts to, protect this incredible place.
Absolutely. There's definitely a growing awareness of the Dead Sea's plight. And there are so many dedicated people and organizations out there working to find solutions.
That's good to hear. So what else is being done besides that Red Sea, Dead Sea project? What are people trying to do to save it?
Well, one approach is all about reducing water consumption in the region. Remember, a lot of the water that used to flow into the Dead Sea is now being used for things like agriculture.
Right. So using water more efficiently, basically, making sure every drop counts.
Exactly. That means promoting water-saving technologies in agriculture, exploring alternative water sources like treated wastewater, and just raising awareness in general among communities about why conservation matters.
Sounds like a multi-pronged approach is needed.
Mm-hmm.
What about the companies that are extracting minerals from the Dead Sea? Is there a way to make that more sustainable?
That's another key part of the puzzle. There are lots of discussions happening right now about regulating mineral extraction, making sure it's done in a more, environmentally responsible way.
So finding a balance between the economy and protecting the environment.
Yeah, that's it. Working with industries to implement best practices, minimizing the impact on those water levels, and figuring out how to, rehabilitate areas that have already been affected.
This sounds like it requires a lot of collaboration, between countries, industries, scientists, policymakers, everyone.
You got it. Saving the Dead Sea isn't something anyone can do on their own. It's got to be a team effort, a shared commitment to finding solutions that work for both people and the environment,
I'm definitely rooting for them. The Dead Sea is too special to lose. Speaking of special, I was reading about the air quality around the Dead Sea. Is there something, unique about it?
Oh, there definitely is. A few factors at play here. First, the air is incredibly dry. Because remember, desert environment. High evaporation rates, so that pulls moisture right out of the air.
Okay, so desert air equals dry air. What's so unique about that? Any benefits to breathing in that super dry air?
Well, it can be really good for people with respiratory problems like asthma. It helps clear their airways, making it easier to breathe.
Like a natural inhaler, kind of?
You could say that. And here's another interesting thing. Since the Dead Sea is the lowest point on Earth, the air actually has a higher concentration of oxygen compared to, say, sea level.
Wait, so lower altitude, more oxygen? How does that work?
Think of it like this. The atmosphere is like a blanket, right? And it gets thinner as you go higher. At sea level, the air is denser, compressed by all the air above it. But as you go below sea level, like at the Dead Sea, that pressure drops, the air expands.
So the air molecules are, what, more spread out at the Dead Sea?
Yeah, exactly. And that means there's slightly more oxygen in every breath you take.
That's wild. A natural oxygen boost. Anything else about the air there?
One more thing. Remember all that salt in the Dead Sea? Well, it affects the air too.
You mean there's like salt in the air, a salty sea breeze?
Not exactly a breeze, but the air does have these tiny particles of salt and minerals that have evaporated from the water.
So you're breathing in Dead Sea minerals.
In a way, yeah. Some people believe that those mineral-rich particles can have positive effects on the respiratory system, although more research is needed on that front.
It's like the Dead Sea has it all. Unique experiences, health benefits, rich history, even special air. It's really an extraordinary place.
It really is, and that's why protecting it is so important. The Dead Sea, it reminds us that we're part of this delicate ecosystem, that our actions, they have a real impact on the natural world.
Well said. It's a message we should all remember. But before we wrap things up, I want to touch on the cultural significance of the Dead Sea. We've talked about the ancient texts and the Dead Sea Scrolls, but what about today? What does it mean to people in modern culture?
That's a great question. The Dead Sea, it still holds this special place in people's hearts and minds from all walks of life. For some, it's deeply spiritual. For others, it's like a source of inspiration, a symbol of resilience, you know?
It's amazing how a natural wonder can evoke so many different emotions and meanings.
It really is. And for a lot of people, it's simply a place of incredible beauty, a place to get away from the everyday and connect with nature in this really unique and unforgettable way.
I get that. I've seen pictures, and it's stunning. The vastness of the water, the mountains, the whole floating thing's definitely on my travel list.
I highly recommend it. Experiencing the Dead Sea firsthand, it's truly magical.
Okay, so we've covered the science, the history, the environmental stuff, the cultural significance. Anything else we need to know about the Dead Sea?
Actually, there's one more thing. The Dead Sea, it could play a big role in climate change research.
Oh, that's interesting. How so?
The Dead Sea, with its unique geology and that hypersaline environment, it's like a natural lab for studying climate change. Remember those layers of sediment at the bottom? They hold a record of past climate conditions going back thousands of years.
Like a climate archive, hidden beneath the surface.
Exactly. By analyzing the sediments, scientists can learn about past changes in temperature, rainfall, even the composition of the atmosphere.
And that can help us understand how the climate has changed over time, and maybe even predict future changes.
That's the idea. The Dead Sea gives us these valuable insights into the long-term effects of climate change. It helps us understand the challenges we're facing in a warming world.
It's amazing how this place, known for being, well, dead, can teach us so much about our planet's dynamics.
It goes to show that there's always more to learn, more to discover, even in places we think we know.
Well said. And on that note, we'll wrap up this part of our deep dive. We'll be back in a moment to answer some listener questions and explore the implications of what we've learned today. Stay with us. We're back for the final part of our Dead Sea deep dive. We've gone over the science, the history, the environmental challenges, even those cultural connections.
It's been quite a journey. Really highlights how amazing and complex our planet is.
For sure. Now, before we wrap up, I know we have some questions from our listeners all about the Dead Sea. Ready to tackle a few?
Absolutely. Hit me with them.
All right, here's one from Sarah. She asks, if the Dead Sea is so salty, why doesn't all the salt just, crystallize, turn into a giant salt block?
Great question, Sarah. It's a delicate balance. Evaporation is always removing water, right? But there's still some fresh water flowing in from the Jordan River, some rainfall, not a lot, but it helps keep the salt concentration from getting to that point where it would solidify.
So it's like a constant push and pull between evaporation and inflow.
Exactly. It's a dynamic system, always adjusting.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, here's another one. This one's from David. He says, I've heard that the Dead Sea isn't just shrinking, it's getting even saltier. Is that true, and what does it mean?
Good question, David. And yeah, it's true. As the Dead Sea shrinks, the salt concentration goes up. Remember, the water evaporates, but the salt stays behind.
It's like when you boil salt water on the stove, it just keeps getting saltier as the water disappears.
Perfect analogy. And that increased salinity, it has consequences. It makes life even harder for the organisms living there, and it can impact the surrounding land, too.
Like a domino effect, one problem leads to another.
Exactly. Shows how complicated these challenges are and why we need a more, well-rounded approach to conservation.
Okay, last one. This is from Maria, and she asks, beyond all the science and environmental stuff, what does the Dead Sea mean to you? What makes it so special?
Wow, that's a great question, Maria. To me, the Dead Sea represents this, paradox, this sense of wonder. Life persists there against all odds. It's a place where history and the present just blend together. It reminds me of how resilient our planet is, but also how fragile. It's awe-inspiring, humbling, and it makes you feel this, responsibility to protect it.
Beautifully said. And those feelings, that wonder and responsibility, I think those are something we can all take away from this. The Dead Sea is this amazing blend of science, history, natural beauty. It really shows us how complex and fragile our world is.
Couldn't agree more. It deserves our attention, our respect, and our commitment to finding solutions for those challenges.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, I think we've reached the end of our Dead Sea exploration. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you've learned something new, maybe even been inspired to explore more on your own. Remember, every little bit helps. Stay informed, make conscious choices, and support those working to protect our planet, and we can all make a difference.
Thanks for having me.
And to all our listeners, until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep asking those questions about the world around us.